This is part 2 in a video series I'm doing to help you learn how to use your power meter to build a progressive training plan. So if you're watching this video, you should already know how to set up your power zones. If you don't know how to do that, you can watch this video. I've posted a link in the description that'll walk you through how to do that. So the first thing we're gonna do is go over how to build a workout that is the right amount of hard for you. And the key to doing this is to understand that there are minimum amounts of time that you need to spend in a given zone to get an adaptation. And that on the other hand, you can actually spend too much time in a zone and overload yourself to the point where you need a lot of recovery between the workouts that hinders your ability to consistently train in a progressively overloading plan. And these time frames are going to vary depending on a few different factors. Age, fitness, training environment, like if you live at altitude or if it's extremely hot outside or you're trying to train indoors for the first time in a long time. Those types of things are going to come into play in deciding on how much time you're going to be able to spend in each zone. So first up is zone 1, 50% or under your FTP. This is like your all-day pace, your recovery pace. Next, 55 to 75% of FTP, also called zone 2. This is your almost all-day pace. So this is the pace you're looking at doing your long endurance rides at. So zone 3, about 75 to 90% of FTP. This is where we can get into more firm numbers. So in a workout that's targeting this zone, you're really gonna want to be spending between 60 and 120 minutes of total time in a given workout in that zone. Any more and you risk overloading yourself to the point where you need too much time off after, and any less and you risk not really getting an effective adaptation from it. 95 to 100% of FTP, so now we're really gonna see the total time spent in zones in a given workout start to drop. And we wanna spend about 30 to 60 total minutes in this zone in a given workout. And now as we go up to 105 to 115% of FTP, now we're above threshold, we're accumulating lactic acid. The amount of time you can spend in this zone drops again to about 20 to 40 minutes, depending on some of the factors we touched on earlier. If you're an older athlete or a beginning athlete, or you're training in really hot conditions, it's gonna be on the lower end, as opposed to if you're an elite athlete in a controlled environment, you may be able to go up to 40 minutes. And then 115% plus VO2 intervals, we're really looking at 10, 12 minutes on up to about 20 minutes of total time spent in that zone. Again, these times are not counting rest. Total time spent in that zone to get an adaptation. So let's talk about work to rest ratios. And whenever you see this written, it's gonna be written as one number, colon, followed by another number. Your work time, colon, followed by your rest time. So if you see 4 to 1, that means you're going to work 4 times as long as you're going to rest, because we're viewing this as a ratio. So now let's go over the guidelines for each zone. Zones 1 and 2, these are pretty much all day. When you go out for a long endurance ride, we're not looking at it as 2 hours in zone 2 with some rest. You're just out riding in that zone. Zone 3, 75 to 90% of FTP, we want to work to rest of about 4 to 1, 95 to 100%, about 3 to 1. Once you get above lactic threshold, we're going into 2 to 1, and then VO2 intervals 1 to 1 or even higher than that. So 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, depending on just how intense these intervals are going to be. And also, we want to keep in mind that the higher intensity or the higher the zone you're working in, the shorter each interval is before you get rest. So for zone 3, you'd be looking at 20 to 60 minutes of consecutive work, one interval, before you take a rest. And then as the intensity gets greater, the interval length should decrease quite substantially before you take that break. So now let's go over how to build a very basic VO2 workout using these guidelines. Now we're not going to talk about why or when you should be inserting VO2 into your training. We're just going to touch on how to build an effective one. So for a VO2 workout, you want to make sure you get a really good warm-up, so 20 to 30 minutes, maybe with a little bit of bursts in there. Just make sure that you've got a decent sweat going before you jump into the higher intensity parts of the workout. So following the rules we established, where we want at least 8 to 10 minutes of total time spent in the VO2 zone, and we want a work to rest ratio of at least 1-to-1, meaning we want our rest time to be equal or greater than each interval length. We could build this as 6 to 12 times 90 seconds at 125 or greater percent of FTP with 90 to 120 seconds rest between. And you might want to do 6 repeats if you're an older athlete or you haven't done much VO2 work and you're just getting into it. But if you've been doing a lot of shorter distance work or you're a well-trained athlete, you could go ahead and attempt 12 repeats of this. And when you're doing VO2 workouts, I've got 125% or more written up here, but these are so intense. You don't really want to be obsessing over a single number on each repeat. VO2 is really just about being way above your FTP and working really hard, but not so hard that you're going to completely fall apart before the end of the workout. The best tip I can give you if you don't have someone overseeing these workouts is to always stop one interval short of what you could possibly do. So if you're at number 8 and it was hard and you think to yourself, I could do a 9th, but I don't think I could get through a 10th, stop, because we're not trying to totally waste ourselves in any one workout during a training plan. That's what you should be doing and saving for races. When we're in a training plan, we want to be consistent and get enough time in these zones to get an adaptation, but again, not overdo it to the point where you need 3 days rest between workouts. All right, that was a really basic workout. So now we're going to get into one that's a little bit more complicated, and we're going to talk about the basis of why you would want to do a workout like this. If you want to be a competitive cyclist, you're going to have to be good at producing high amounts of power for short periods of time and then recovering around threshold. Because if you've ever done a group ride or a cycling race, you know that the pattern is for people to get to the front and send it for a few seconds to a couple of minutes until the pack calms down, and then you get a short bit of time to recover, but it's not full rest before someone else sends it again and you have to respond. So now we're going to build a workout that really reflects the demands of a group ride or a crit race. And what makes this workout a little bit more complicated is that it needs to focus on 2 different zones and spend enough time in each to get an adaptation. We'll start off with a 20 to 30 minute warm up. Again, this will be a pretty intense workout, so make sure you're nice and warmed up. And then we're gonna go 3 minutes at 95% of FTP, that zone 4 range, into 1 minute at 110%. So up above FTP, creating that lactic acid, just like you would be doing in a race. So knowing what we already know about needing to spend certain amounts of time in each zone, we know that to get an adaptation at FTP, we need to spend 30 to 60 minutes at FTP in a workout that's solely focusing on that zone, and in a workout that would be solely focusing on zone 5, just above FTP, we need to spend 20 to 40 minutes there. And we also know that the proper interval length for an FTP interval is 10 to 30 minutes before we get rest. And then the proper interval length for 110% of FTP is 6 to 12-ish minutes. Again, these are ranges, but 6 to 12-ish minutes. So for both, we're going to essentially just meet close to the middle. But since this is more FTP and less above FTP, we'll err closer to the side of the FTP guidelines. So we'll do 3 rounds of 3 minutes at FTP, followed by 1 minute over FTP, for a total of a 12-minute interval before we take any rest. Now, for example, if we were to change this workout from 3 minutes at FTP, 1 minute over, to 2 minutes at FTP, 2 minutes over, we would want to drop the length of the interval before we got any rest, and also drop the total duration of the workout because we're spending more time in a higher intensity zone. But again, you want to know yourself and know where you're at in your training. I would have an older athlete or an athlete who's never done this type of set before start with 2 minutes at FTP and then 1 minute over, and repeat that 2 or 3 times the first time we do this workout so we can get an idea of how well they handle it. And to establish how much rest we want between each of these rounds, we do the same thing we just did, where we take the work to rest of an FTP interval and the work to rest of an interval above FTP, and we meet somewhere in the middle depending on how much time or what the ratio of time we're spending in each is. So for this, I would have an athlete take about 5 minutes of rest between each round. And you can use these rules to build out any workout focusing on 1 or 2 zones. If you wanted to do a workout with zone 3 and then above FTP, which is something I do for a lot of my professional triathletes, where even though it's a non-draft race, they have to respond to bursts. So the majority of their race time is spent in zone 3, but they've got to get used to spending some time above FTP to stay in that group. And for age groupers who want to be competitive in Kona, because that's the nature of the age group race in Kona as well. Because like it or not, some of these Ironmans are extremely crowded, and you may spend a lot of your time trying to get away from pack. And a workout like this of 8 minutes at 80% FTP, or zone 3 and then 2 minutes at FTP, or maybe 1 minute above FTP, would also be very applicable to these longer distance cycling and gravel races if you want to be competitive, because the majority of your 100-mile or 150-mile day is going to be in zone 3. But if you want to stay with the group, you're going to have to get good at going way above zone 3 and then coming back and recovering in zone 3. So I hope you're seeing that this isn't really an exact science. Like, whether you're doing 9 minutes of over-under work or 12 minutes or 15, and whether you're getting a 3-to-1 work ratio or a 4-to-1 or 2-to-1, that's not really the most important factor here. What we're focusing on is making sure we're getting roughly the right amount of time in a zone and not overworking ourselves, but not underworking ourselves, and making sure that we can keep this up consistently throughout a progressive training plan. You'll be much better off doing workouts like this 3 times a week on the easier side of the spectrum consistently, rather than getting it in twice a week or even just once a week, but doing it on the upper end of those ranges. If you enjoyed that and you found it somewhat helpful or informative, please help me trick these algorithms into thinking I'm more popular than I am by liking, subscribing, and commenting on any of the videos you found to be helpful.